welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're going to be looking at the advisor of the future. I think advisor roles have changed quite a lot of it in recent years. We've put up a picture here of a bit tongue-in-cheek of a robot taking a phone call there. So we're going to have a look at the what the reality is likely to be of the role of the advisor as we move forward into the future. Delighted to be joined by two regulars on our webinar program. Delighted to be joined by Martin Jukes from Mpathy Plus. Mpathy Plus is a contact center consultancy. Which sort of specialist part of the market do you focus on these days, Martin?
Well, we look at three key areas really, John. The first being business transformation in helping organisations to change both their contact centre and the various components around the contact centre. We focus on performance improvement, so how to transform performance and improve that. And finally, the third area is in supporting operations, whether that's with mentoring staff, interim managers, training, or whatever the requirement is. So quite a broad outlook.
Excellent, and delighted to also be joined by another regular on our program. I think Jeremy's been on a webinar about once a year with us for the last, I think, 7 years or so. So quite a good perspective over that time. And Jeremy, you're with Enghouse, interactive technology provider, and you're going to be looking at the role that technology plays in shaping the advisor of the future.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think a lot of changes going on right now, and it's really that debate around, you know, finding the right balance between man and machine, and you know, what is the right approach and what is the right balance, and it's definitely not one size fits all. You know, there's a whole host of technologies and solutions out there from ourselves and many other vendors in the market. And I think the real trick is this, as I'm sure as we go through Martin and my presentation, you'll start to realize technology is probably not the problem. People, culture, measurements, values, all those sorts of things are some of the tougher nuts to crack, if you like.
Indeed. Well, you can watch a replay of today's webinar later on today. It's callcenterhelp.com/recorded webinars. I know a number of you do like to share these webinars with your senior leadership team, so you can certainly do that. If you're not already logged into the chat room, I think we've got about 30 odd people logged in already, which is only about a third of the audience so far. So just type this address in, cch.chat. Just put that into your browser, and that will take you straight into the chat room. You can do that through either your phone or through a separate browser. So it's just that address, cch.chat. If your company firewall prevents that, you can use the old address, callcenterhelper.com/chat. Both will take you to there. We do have a quiz later on, so if you want to take part in that quiz, and we do have a prize in the quiz. There's these chat buttons when you're logged into the chat room, so that's what you do to get the quiz. You can either put the screen, you know, have the webinar slides in front of you, and either if you've got a wide screen, have the chat room next to it, or on your mobile phone, so you can see what's going on there. You can chat with other people in the audience. You can here's the voting buttons down the bottom of the page here, and you can download the webinar slides through that link there. So again, there's the link, cch.chat. Just type that into your browser. I think we've got another 20 people who just logged in there. The added advantage, if you want to ask any questions or leave any tips, just use #question or #tip when you're in the chat room. And we have either a bottle of champagne, there's one that we've got ready to go, or a box of chocolates or an Amazon gift voucher for the best tip. We've got another prize as well for the winner of the quiz, which will be halfway through the webinar. So I'm going to start off by asking Martin to share his thoughts then on what you think the advisor of future is likely to look like, and then we'll come back to do a quiz after Martin's presentation. Martin.
Thank you very much, Jonty, and hopefully you can all see my screen from there. Yes, thank you for inviting me to join the webinar again. It's as I say, it's always a pleasure. I look at things from a user's perspective. So sorry, I had a quick freeze of the presentation then. So we all know that things are changing, and what I want to try and do is give you my views from the front line. So as Mpathy Plus, we work with lots of different contact centres, lots of different organisations, and I see lots of things happening, and I want to try and feed back some of those things that I see and what I predict may well be happening in the future. So if we first of all start looking at what are the drivers of change, because there are quite a few different elements of that. So we've got first of all technology, and by technology I mean not just different channels of communication, which of course are changing, but of course we've got all of the support tools and the ways of dealing with different inquiries. So the likes of artificial intelligence, we've got bots, chat tools, etc. So quite a lot of different technology that's always coming onto the market and currently always being refreshed. We then look at customer experience, and customer experience is one of those things that some people have thought of as being a bit of a buzzword over recent times. Actually, I think it's starting to drive organisations in the way that they behave and the way that they want to deal with customers, and starting to deliver an experience that customers will relate to rather than one that just is given to them. And the third area of change is one that is often overlooked, and that's the actual products and services that an organisation is either selling or providing on a day-to-day basis. So we're starting to see more and more complexity in services, in products. We're starting to see products that are reliant on external factors, services that are integrated with other tools, and it just starts to build a greater level of complexity in terms of solutions for customers. If I just quickly look at what do customers expect, and it's quite clear really that there is that customers do want to be able to self-serve. There's lots of self-serve technology in place that they are starting to use, and they want to use it, but sometimes they can't use it, or it may not be appropriate for them to use it. A good example of that would be going to a supermarket. You know, you go to a supermarket, you go to the checkouts. Some people will always choose to go through the self-service. Some people will always choose to go through to the served areas, to a cashier. Actually, I find myself, it varies depending on what's happening in my day at that time and what the queues are like. So having that choice is quite important. But actually, what do customers really want? They want to be able to engage with somebody that understands and is empowered to help them when they need that help. They want it to be accessible when required. So if you're providing a 24-hour service, then you need to be able to provide some support around that for extended hours. Ownership of an issue, of an inquiry is becoming more and more prevalent, because it's not always the case that inquiries can be dealt with on the first point of contact, which was a key measure in the past. I think as things get more complex and more complicated, it's going to be more difficult for that resolution at the first point, and I trust that there will be some ownership in there aligned to the resolution. And then of course, what really helps people is the reason they make contact is because they've got a problem, or they want to do something, or they want to buy something, or want to order something. And generally, when they're talking to somebody, and how I see this changing in the future, they're talking to somebody because they need some support, and that's what they're really expecting, support rather than just instructions. So aligned to that is some empathic service, and of course I mentioned earlier trust, which I think trust is due to be one of the key features and key measures in the future as regards customer experience. So the possible impact of some of the changes that we're seeing, well, if I just look at first of all the complexity of interactions, well, it goes without saying that actually simple transactions are going to be automated. They're going to be able to be dealt with by people serving themselves. So the impact of that is that the net result, the net contacts that come through to an organization are more likely to grow in complexity and become more complex. As a result, we see some increases in duration. So there's been a drive for a number of years to try and reduce contact duration. Actually, I think the nature of the complexity of a contact means that it will increase the duration. And also, despite what a lot of people predicted, we're starting to see increases, or we're still seeing increases in volumes. Now, those volumes may be spread across a wide number of different contact channels, but we're seeing that people are having to engage more with organisations than perhaps they would have done a few years ago, which is possibly a real surprise to many. I'm just going to move over onto hand over to Jonty for the first poll.
Well, we're going to be asking a question that I think ties very much into Martin's point there. So over the next 5 years, do you expect the number of your advisors in your contact center to either increase a lot, increase a little, stay about the same, decrease a little, or decrease a lot? So do you expect the number of advisors in your organization to go up or down? And how much do you expect that to go up or down by? So this is looking to say the year 2025 in 5 years' time. So do you expect the number of advisors to go up or down? So if you'd just like to vote on the options there, it'd be fascinating to see. That's in the panel in the center of your screen. I think we've got most of the results there, and quite interesting results here, Martin. The biggest one is, it's quite evenly split, I've got to say. About 36% say they expect it to decrease a little. About 22% say it's going to increase a little. And about 27% say stay about the same. So overall, no one is expecting the role to be replaced by robots anytime soon. Martin, what's your thought?
No, it's very interesting, and I certainly support that view, because I think it's about, as Jeremy was talking about earlier, it's about harnessing the power of automation and technology and aligning that to the human elements and being able to focus on what's required in those areas. So a good balance, and it's pleasantly surprising to see that information. I suspect if we'd asked that 12 months ago, it may have been slightly more potential reduction. So yes, I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah, what's interesting though is people are expecting the numbers to decrease, though with the complexity and volume staying static. I mean, Jeremy, I don't know what your thoughts are. My anticipation is probably the numbers will actually slightly increase unless people get very, very good at self-service.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think probably one of the biggest changes that we'll see is there's a whole group of people that currently don't see themselves as customer service advisors that will end up becoming customer service advisors. So the role and shape and nature of the role is going to change, and people right now that can sit in an office and say, well, that's kind of not my job, or I'll respond when I feel like it, are going to be pulled nearer and nearer the front line. So the actual number of people involved, it may move around a bit, but I think the type of people and where they currently sit is probably where you'll see the larger change.
Indeed. Martin, you're going to look at workloads next, I think.
Yes, I am. Yes, and for what it's worth, I think the number will increase. For very much in agreement with Jeremy's view that the role will grow. So we're just moving on to that and looking at how workloads will change. I've just sort of done an illustration here of how I think things may well change in the future. So if I look at now, and we'd see, okay, on that scale there, up to about 2.5 out of 7, that workload will be done by a contact center, with the remaining being done by the back office. In the future, I can see quite a significant shift in that, with more and more work being brought to the front end, with more end-to-end services completed by the contact center, and taking a little bit, reducing the workload on the back office, so they become a little bit more specialist. So in effect, it's about neutralizing some of the specialities that are in place at the moment, bringing those forward to more people, so more people can deliver them at the front end. I think we'll also see, as a result of that, increased ownership of the end-to-end service by the contact center, or the initial welcome part of the inquiry. And also, I think as we start to look at workloads, one of the bigger impacts will be the growth in the complexity and the number of providers or suppliers or components within a solution. So as a really up-to-date example, we were setting up for this webcam a little bit earlier, and my webcam didn't work, and you start thinking, why isn't the webcam working? And actually, is it the hardware? Is it the camera? Is it Windows? Is it Microsoft? Is it the platform they're working on? And it could well be so many different components, and you start adding all those together, and you start to see the complexity. So organizations are going to have to start thinking more about how they deal with that broader aspect to relieve the customer's issue rather than just taking responsibility for their own components. So in looking at all of this, we start to see that really there's going to be a different mix in the approach attitude and the approach attitude and skills that agents or advisors need. And I think again I've started to look at this in a little bit more detail from both a skills approach and an attitude perspective to try and give a view of what I think some of those future attributes will be for advisors. So we look at skills. I think one of the key skills and a strengthening skill, something that can still be improved on, is customer engagement. So I still see customers that are contacting organisations that are really talked to but not necessarily engaged with. So they might get a part of the outcome they receive, but there's still a lack of engagement. I think there's a need for more engagement as issues become more complex. I think there'll be a need for translation skills, and I don't mean necessarily language translation, although that may well be a growth area, but I'm talking about translating technical components into user-friendly language. So again, you can go to websites, you can get lots of information, lots of self-help from different organizations, but actually understanding what that means and being able to translate it is going to be a key skill. I also think that advisors will have a real focus on having to develop solutions. So a customer will contact them with something that isn't easy, necessarily simple. So they'll be looking to develop a solution to resolve that inquiry or fix the issue. And of course, advisors are going to continue to work across different channels, different media, and we all know that we need different skill sets to cope with those different channels and different media. So I think that the whole skill set for advisors needs a refresh and development in the future. In terms of the approach, I think the approach has to be customer appropriate. By that, what I'm really trying to say is every customer is a little bit different. So if I just use the example that I talked about earlier where I went to a supermarket, what's appropriate for me today might be inappropriate tomorrow with regards going to the self-service or going to the cashier till. And it's very difficult to try and define exactly what is appropriate, but it's through that customer engagement that advisors will be able to do that and understand what's best for that customer. I think that there's going to be lots of knowledge. I talked earlier about the translation. I think being able to utilize the knowledge and being resourceful is going to be more and more part of the approach for advisors. So it's easy to actually go and just gather information and fix a problem, but able to utilize that and feed that back to the customer and being able to use it to the maximum effect will be a key attribute. And finally, in terms of approach, I think there needs probably to be more and more collaboration with customers. So most people think about collaboration as being an internal function. What I'm talking about is working with customers to develop the solution. So again, going back to that example with the webcam, I managed to resolve it myself eventually, but maybe if I had to speak to somebody in a technical support somewhere, they would have been working with me to try and fix the problem. So they'd have been asking me to do things to try and work out where the issue was. More and more of that collaboration in the future, plus the collaboration within the organization as well. I talked a little bit about the importance of empathic attitudes, and I think that's really, really important. When we start to look at the key things that humans have the advantage, if I can use that term, over robots and technology and automation, I think empathy is one of those key things, and I think it's very difficult for automated solutions to necessarily demonstrate that empathy. The attitude of being focused on the customer and the outcome that's right for the customer is again going to be quite important. And it all comes back to how is that advisor thinking? What is their approach? What are their skill set? But again, most importantly, their attitude. Is it going to be focused on the customer? Is it going to be outcome driven? And finally, there needs to be flexibility. So advisors to date have often worked within strict process guidelines and performance restrictions, I would call them. I think there's the opportunity for advisors in the future to become more flexible and start to take greater responsibility for resolving an outcome that's right for the customer. So that may well be taking longer to deal with some things. It may well be they're opening cases to deal with things on an ongoing basis. But I think it's about having that flexible attitude to meet the customer's needs. I'm going to start talking about the support. So what's needed to support that? Well, first of all, it's about knowing who your customer is and what your customer is talking about with regards to the products or the services that they're engaged with. So having that customer data is going to be more and more important. We then start to look at the more detailed knowledge that's required to be able to work with customers. So some of that could be about product support. So it may well be something about a specification of an insurance policy, or it might well be part of a technical perspective on Microsoft products, or it could be anything like that. And then of course we've got the technical support. So how are these things all working? How are they all working together? So if again we're looking at the Internet of Things, we start to see more and more components in a solution for a customer or customer's activities. I think having that support there to be able to go and test things or try things, but most importantly learn from other people or other situations where these experiences have taken place. Moving on to management. So we talked a little bit about, or I've talked a little bit about how advisors will change, how their role will change. I think that the thing that's really behind that and will enable that is the shift in the management style. So I see a real shift from hands-on management to enabling advisors to be able to do their jobs. So instead of controlling, giving them the support to be able for them to be able to do their job, instead of approving everything and being a point of escalation, actually empowering advisors to be able to do their job. So the whole structure around management will be different, and those responsibilities will shift as well. I'm not sure that everything will shift. So when I talk about management, I don't mean a complete devolvement of current management skills. I think there will be a shift in responsibility. I also see a shift, quite a fundamental shift from contacts to cases. So we're going to become more and more outcome driven rather than contact driven. And then start looking at what's required to be able to manage that process, manage performance as those things change. So I've listed there some of the things that that most people would probably see in their current performance management areas of measurement. So very productivity focused. And again, what I see there is a change. Some of those will still be in place, but they may be shared or reducing in responsibility or in priority a little bit more. So I can see more being a contact resolution rate rather than a contact handling time. I can see more and more in customer satisfaction. And I do often think actually customer satisfaction, people see that as being an old-fashioned terminology. Actually, it isn't really, is it? It's what people are looking for. People want to go away satisfied with the outcome of working with that organization. One of the areas that I think has been missed for a long time in contact centres is bringing the key learnings from the front line back into an organisation. Lots of people talk about this, and it's been talked about for a long time with continuous improvement strategies, but I still think that there's the opportunity to increase that and do more and more of that, and be able to share that knowledge to be able to benefit other customers and other advisors as they come along. Where we talked before about sort of the way that people deal with customers, then we've had some quite good quality assurance tools over the past and some quite good strategies for that. I think one of the things that's going to be really important and quite difficult to measure is appropriateness. But for me, having that appropriate level of service for me as an individual customer will become more and more important. We talked about personalisation for a number of years. Actually, appropriateness is just fitting within that personalisation and meeting those personal needs at that personal time. And then, of course, the level of engagement. So there's two areas to this really. One is the engagement that advisor has with customers, but also, perhaps more importantly, is the engagement they have with the rest of the organisation and the products and the services that are delivered by that organisation, so that they can actually represent them effectively and efficiently for the customer's benefit.
Well, we're going to just pick up on that last point on engagement as one of the newer metrics that we're going to happen in the future. I'd just like to ask the question of how frequently do you measure advisor engagement in your contact center? Is it the annual staff survey? Is that what drives it? Or do you do something on a daily or weekly basis, some degree of sampling, or have you got some even real-time type of advisor engagement, or do you not do it at all? So just like to vote on that. just while those votes are coming in, reminder that we will be jumping to a quiz in about 5 minutes time. So it'd be very useful to log into our chat room. That's on this link here. Just type that into your browser, cch.chat, and that will take you through to the contact center chat room. I think only half our audience are logged into the chat room so far, so cch.chat. So let's just share the results here. And I think, Martin, there is a little way to go now in terms of overall measurement of employee engagement. Most people, 29% do it annually, 19% don't do it at all, 18% quarterly, and 19% monthly, and 14% weekly. So, Martin, I think that's going to have to change in the future if we're going to get the advisor of the future.
Yes, I think so. I think it'll be more important in terms of retention, to understand how advisors are feeling about the organisation they work for. I think actually when I look at that, what I see is quite a lot of organisations that are simply involved in a corporate policy or corporate approach to employee engagement rather than advisor engagement. And I'm quite an advocate of, yes, do those because they're important, because they represent the whole organisation. But within a contact centre, I think there's some specific needs to do more and more assessment of the level of engagement. So I would certainly expect it to be more than annually. And I think if you look at the frequency of one-to-ones and things like that, that is actually a good opportunity to consider engagement and to talk to the advisor and look at and understand more about them. But not everybody is taking that approach. So yes, things need to change in that area. Moving on to what advisors will expect in the future and some of the expectations of that. Well, I think salaries will increase. I think if I look at key areas of growth in terms of salaries, I think frontline advisors could well be one of those areas, particularly where they're dealing with the more complex technical perspectives, technical inquiries, and have a different relationship with customers to simply answering an initial inquiry. I think benefits packages probably need to be focused on the advisor instead of being representing being for the whole organisation. So again, it's moving away from something that's corporate, shall I say, to something that's specific for a contact centre and represents those needs. I think one of the other things with an advisor expectation is job satisfaction, and I certainly expect there to be increases in job satisfaction as these roles change and become more responsible and taking ownership of people's own workloads and the cases and the outcomes for customers. So I certainly think that's something that will increase and improve, hopefully. And what I would say is, of course, there's a whole myriad of different types of contact centres that we're talking about here. So some will change more than others, and some will change at a much faster rate than others. If I then move on to looking at comparative roles, so at the moment you look at comparative roles with contact centres, so we probably all know what they are. I think in the future that's likely to change to become more comparing with technical support staff, colleagues, perhaps IT specialists. I think there's going to be more and more work involved in working with customers and actually teaching them how to use tools, services, solutions, products. So I think there's an element of educating and being able to teach in there as well. And most importantly, of being professional advisors. So being able to give advice that's thought through and considered rather than just being able to just copy a script or something like that. The impact of HR on all these things, of course, is that there will need to be, refinements to recruitment strategies, retention strategies, because as people are sort of developing their skills and the engagement, it's more and more important to keep those people and work with them and have a longer term employee. And of course, what I've talked about earlier in salaries increasing and comparative roles, there will also need to be changes to salary benchmarking. So looking in different areas, different places, and looking different metrics on which to be able to, different benefit packages on which to be able to compare. Again, all fitting into the reward policies. And then, of course, as an outcome from all of that, when we start to look at how other expectations from advisors, there's a real thing about gamification and being able to present data and their performance and give them challenges and actually use technology as a tool to motivate them. So looking at how that can be best used, best placed, and I think it's something that actually changes the perspective and outcome for an advisor as much as anything else, rather than simply giving them a set of numbers. Give them some challenges to be able to work towards. So that's got to the point where I'd like to sort of try and summarize now. And I think it's clear that customer engagement is changing. It's not just contact centers changing or customer expectations changing. It's customer engagement that's changing. The role of the advisor is changing and will continue to develop. So it's not going to happen, you know, for everybody at the same time. It's going to continue to change and evolve over a period of time. I think advisor, a contact center advisor or customer advisor or whatever the name will be, and I think there's probably an opportunity for lots of different names, it will become a career rather than just a job. And I think it'll be something that people start to move into the contact center from other parts of the organization, much as Jeremy alluded to earlier, with increased job satisfaction being one of the attractive things, components in there. We'll need to see different competencies, as I've talked about earlier. And one of the key things will be ownership of workloads and responsibilities. So advisors taking more responsibility for their own working day, their own working shift pattern, and the customer outcomes. And with that, team leaders, managers, actually enabling them to be able to do that and supporting them. We'll see changes in rewards, different reward strategies. But most importantly, I think we're talking about people. And I think HR departments and HR functions will need to adapt to the future and be able to support the contact center and the team leaders and the managers in being able to do that with fresh approaches to HR and customer retention, employee retention. So that's where I've sort of got to at the moment. I think there's lots and lots more discussion that we could have in this area. But if you would like to talk about me some more, then please feel free to contact me, and I'll happily chat to you.
Thank you very much for that, Martin. We're going to jump across and we're going to do a quiz. So if you're not logged into the chat room, either type in callcenterhelper.com/chat or just type in cch.chat as a quick way to get into the chat room. And while we're waiting for you to log in, I think we've got about another 50 people yet to log into the chat room. Once you're logged in, if you'd just like to say, what did you like best about Martin's presentation? I thought Martin made some very interesting points there. The ones I've taken away, move back office tasks will move from the back office into the contact center. Customer data is very important if you're going to provide the right level of support. And I think bringing key learnings from the front office into the back end operations, I think is going to be quite key there. So here's the address, callcenterhelper.com/chat, and we're going to start off with a quiz. I think we've got 71 people logged into the chat room so far. So the first question: which of the following predictions did Martin not make about the contact center of the future? Was it A, customer queries will increase in complexity? Was it B, extended opening hours will become an expectation? Was it C, salary levels will rise? Or is it D, contact volumes will reduce? So which of these options did Martin not make about the contact center of the future? If you're not logged in, it is cch.chat there. So we're just waiting for a couple of the results to come in there. I think we've got most of the votes in there, and it looks like most of you did get the correct answer there, which is contact volumes will reduce. Martin said that we live in a world where the rate of change is increasing, which in turn provides greater complexity and greater choice. So let's have a look, and we've got Scott in the lead with that one. According to a recent survey, what percentage of employees will regularly work from home in 2022? It's only 2 years away. Is it A, 20%, B, 40%? Is it C, 60%, or is it D, 80%? According to a recent survey, what percentage of employees, this is employees in the economy, will regularly work from home in 2022. Let's have a look at the results, and actually looks like most people got that wrong. The answer, according to the survey, is C, 60%. A Virgin Media survey has predicted 60% of employees will regularly work from home by 2022, with attracting a wider pool of a wider pool of workers being noted as the key reason why. So that's certainly a very high number there. Let's have a look at the next question. Which US presidents once said, "You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today"? Was it A, George Washington, B, Abraham Lincoln, C, Ronald Reagan, or D, Barack Obama? Which US presidents once said, "You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today"? I think that's a very good corporate responsibility slogan, that one. So who actually made that? Let's have a look at the answer. 25% of you got the 25 of you got the right answer. Abraham Lincoln, who gave that quote. Barack Obama gave an interesting quote. "The future rewards those who press on. I do not have time to feel sorry for myself. I don't have time to complain. I'm going to press on." So I guess that's a very good quote overall there. So scores are there. So according to some research that Call Center Helper that we did recently, which of the following technologies saw the biggest growth from 2018 to 2019? Was it A, quality assurance solutions, B, process automation, was it C, customer feedback solutions, or was it D, knowledge base? Which technology saw the biggest growth from 2018 to 2019? Let's just share the results with you here. The actual, not many people got the actual answer. The actual answer was knowledge base. Most people went for process automation. If we have a look, it's a bit small to see it here, but in knowledge base, jumped up from 60% of people having a knowledge base in their contact center to 70%. So that was the biggest rise that we saw in the survey. Workforce management technology also showed a significant rise as well. So some quite surprising results there. That's a report available on the Call Center Helper website. I think it's called What Are Call Centers Doing Right Now? So I think we might put a link in the chat room for you there. And then I think the last question here, true or false? The futurist Ray Kurzweil predicted by 2030, nanobots would be implanted in our brains to help us learn better information. So true or false? Did the futurist Ray Kurzweil predict that by 2030, nanobots would be implanted in our brains? Let's have a look at the results there. Yes, indeed, he said that was true, and he said nanobots will be able to access the internet and help us learn new information in minutes, which could have some very interesting implications for the contact center in the distant future. So the winner of that is Martin 3, so we'll be getting in touch with you, and we'll be sending a prize out to you. So let's have a quick look now at what's been happening within the chat room. We've had a question in from Scott. Scott asks, why have contacts, or why do we expect contacts to increase? Is this due to having multiple channels that they can contact by? Jeremy, have you got an idea of why contacts might be increasing?
Well, I think what you sort of start to see is, like, when you look at the volume of contact that most organizations are receiving, as you sort of open up more channels, it's almost by definition, it's a bit like the more roads you build, the more cars you get. The more channels you kind of add, the more contact or customer contact you get. And so, you know, there's a whole range of different ways of handling that, and call deflection and self-service and all of those kind of things that we'll touch on in a bit. But there's no doubt, if you look at your own lives, the amount of interaction you have with organizations is probably gone up compared to what it was 10 or 20 years ago.
Indeed, I think Eric has answered the point, said I believe customers are getting lazier and lazier and feel more entitled as well, which could cause it to increase. We've had a tip in from Tom, who says there'll be an increase, there'll be a rise of agents as subject experts, increasingly more straightforward queries are being managed via self-help, and call center agents are being turned into super agents. I think, Martin, that's a sort of a synopsis of some of the your thoughts.
I think so. Yes, I think Tom's covered my probably 4 slides in one sentence there, which is excellent.
Well done. Well done
yeah.
to Tom. Harry has said call center staff will always be required because IVR or self-service is created by people, and people make mistakes that result in malfunctions. I think this is quite an interesting one. I think also just offering more information via self-service could potentially also increase demand. We wrote an article saying where we did some research in this subject, and actually by providing people with more information, you give people more options to come back and query. I had a case with I used to get a pension statement once a year by post, and they brought in self-service, and having that information more regularly meant I had more queries about those services, which resulted in more calls into the contact center, which I think the organization was quite surprised about. Hannah said remote working will become the norm for home agents, for advisors, and will reduce staff attrition. And we've got a question from Erica. What would you suggest is the best way to stop hand-holding customers and make them accountable, and yet delivering a wow service? Jeremy, I don't know if you've got any thought about hand-holding customers. I'd have.
Well, I mean, from our experience of what we see organisations doing, we do find customers are a lot more digitally savvy than they used to be, and a lot more able to self-serve and sort things out for themselves. But there's also an expectation that's been set in consumers' minds of how things should work. So, if you look at the amount of money that we as collective consumers spend on IT, and when I say consumer IT, I mean the iPhone or the iPad or things like that, it outstrips business and government spend by a ratio of about 10 to 1. So, as you start to put that into context, when people pick up an iPhone, they have an expectation of how technology should work. And when they arrive on your website or your self-service portal and it doesn't work like the iPhone, their instant response, and I think there was a response earlier in the chat window, which was why customers are lazy. It's if it doesn't work intuitively, if it doesn't work effortlessly, the default response is, do you know what, I'll just dial 0 for reception and get them to fix this. People aren't going to invest huge amounts of time in fixing what they perceive to be your problem. So if you give people the right tools and make them work effortlessly and seamlessly, people will use them. So I guess that would probably be my response.
Indeed. Well, rather than diving into your presentation during the questions, probably a good time now to actually take us through your thoughts about how technology can help this whole debate.
Sure. So, well, thanks for that. So, as Martin said, I think a great place to start when we think about the technology that is going to be useful to a customer service advisor as we move forward, the logical place to start from that is what are the customers likely to expect, because that's going to be the driver of ultimately what service the advisor has to deliver. And everyone on this webinar is a customer, and if you think about really what you yourself want, you want effortless, seamless customer service, irrespective of the channel that you've used. When you deal with a person, you want to deal with somebody who's professional, competent, polite, and efficient. And Martin talked about that word empowerment. There's nothing more frustrating than you get through to somebody who is bright enough, intelligent enough, capable enough to be able to fix your problem, but because of a corporate policy, can't do that. And customers increasingly expect organizations to use what we would call their digital DNA. So when you ask somebody what their name and address is, when you've already sent them an invoice or a bill with their name and address on it, you've just increased customer effort. You haven't used the digital DNA or the information or data you have on that customer or their transaction or history with you as an organization to yours and their advantage. So there's definitely expectations that are set there. And there's a whole bunch of stats and facts on this slide. I won't go through them all, but I think when we start to think about what is likely to drive customer behavior as we move forward. We've got the rollout of 5G, lots of hype and news, and Donald Trump getting upset about the use of Huawei in the UK 5G network. But what 5G is going to bring is, more and more powerful applications onto your mobile device. So if we think about current applications, a lot of them are point and shoot, single kind of issue apps. The ability for them to work together, cohesively, and for them to work together, for example, with the voice-enabled assistant on your phone, Siri, Alexa, whatever it may be, will increase. So the ability for customers to self-serve is going to increase. But as we were talking about just before this slot started, is, as you provide self-service tools, they have to work intuitively. And it was interesting, just before we started the whole webinar session, we were in a small debate about, I think, sort of 5 to 2 around, the contact center and customer service being still perceived in many organizations as a cost center, as opposed to, the new marketing and it becoming a revenue generating center. And I think if nothing else, if you took away 2 stats or facts off this slide, it would be the 73% of customers fall in love with a brand and will remain loyal if you give them the right quality of service consistently. And if you think about, in the Western world, mature markets, how difficult it is to attract and get hold of a new customer and the cost of acquiring that new customer, that's a pretty powerful fact that most CEOs or senior people in a company I would assume, pay attention to. And if we start to think about, 86% of buyers are willing to pay more for a great experience, there is a real business case there for this. And I think, those of you that have used a low-cost airline and paid extra for speedy boarding, that's exactly what you've done. So, there are different business models that can be built around this. And definitely as we move forward, I think the role of, the customer service agent and advisor will change enormously, and hopefully the perception along with it. So as we start to think about, customer service advisors, the organizations that we deal with, underneath the covers right now, I think there's an awful lot of fear. There's a lot of misunderstanding, poor communication, and apprehension around what's going to happen to the customer service advisor role. How is technology going to affect that? And most of the rhetoric, most of the perception is negative. It's around the big bad robot off of the Terminator film is going to kind of walk through the door and take the CSA's job away. And actually, when we look at the reality, and I think the poll that we did fairly early on kind of brought that out, where nobody really overall expected the number of advisors to ultimately decrease. We kind of expect the shape and nature of the role to change, but overall the number's not going to decrease. But actually, some of the time, the people that are sat with the headset on doing this job, that's not how they feel. And that's hugely important, because as you start to try and roll some of these technologies out and you start to orchestrate a business transformation, if you're not taking people with you, you're not going to get to the end result that you hope to achieve. And there's a huge amount of, when we talk about employee and advisor engagement, huge amount of technology tools out there that can assist you with this, in from obvious workforce management stuff, but things like real-time speech analytics that can listen to both sides of a call in real time and help and coach and advise an advisor whilst they're in mid-flight of a phone call, are really powerful things that can measure engagement and also monitor great behavior and then feed that back to the rest of the team. So as we start to think about, we've talked a lot about this sort of shift to the nirvana of man working in harmony with machine and this wonderful world where everything works brilliantly. And, you stop and stand back and say, well, why isn't this sort of happening, or why is this so hard? And really, there's some fundamental, well-intentioned mistakes that have ultimately created this difficult situation for many organizations. The first one is organizational structure. Most companies are structured in vertical silos: sales, marketing, finance, IT, HR, operations, vertical silos that do a specific vertical function. If you think about customer journeys, they run horizontally, left to right, A to B. The customer doesn't really care about how your business is structured. They just want to get to point B as quickly as possible with the least amount of effort. So there's an inherent structural issue with this. And I don't sit here sat on top of the sort of golden hill. The company I'm sat working for, we're structured in exactly that way. I work in marketing, other people work in sales and finance and other functions. But there's an inherent organizational conflict between that structure and how customer service journeys typically run. Then when we think about, the last decade or so, as we shifted from the call center to the contact center to multi-channel and then to omni-channel and whatever it's going to be called next year, but we've introduced more and more channels, and we introduced them in exactly the same way as we did departments. So we quite often put them in a vertically siloed way. So we have, a group of people doing email, a group of people managing social media and Twitter. We have some other people doing chat. We maybe have some other people doing voice-based calls. We've got some people doing inbound, some people doing outbound. And all of this is not really fully aligned. We've kind of created disconnects structurally in the way things should flow and run. And then to compound that, and Martin sort of talked about outcomes and people being measured more on outcomes as opposed to tasks. And one of the things, if we think about, say, a car manufacture line, this is a little bit like the guy who fits the engine in the car saying, well, I've completed my task, the engine's in the car, and not caring about the fact that as it comes off the end of the production line, it's got no wheels on it. The customer outcome is a car with wheels, an engine, a steering wheel, and it all works seamlessly together. So that's the outcome the customer wants. But all of these sort of vertical structures, channels, all of this kind of compounds to create people feeling like they're doing the right thing, but ultimately it's not always driving the outcome that the customer wants. And really, when you put all of that together, you'll start to see, staff, frustration and higher staff attrition and turnover. We see lower customer satisfaction and churn there. And ultimately, that all drives increased cost into the business, lower profitability. So they do hurt businesses. And before you know it, most businesses are now kind of in a box. This is a difficult situation, starting to orchestrate some kind of business transformation whilst you're in this situation is difficult. And most organizations stare down the barrel of it and are faced with that choice. Do they make the change? Do they take the bold step forward? Or do they do this and just make the box a bit more comfortable? We add some columns and rows to the spreadsheet, we get some more temporary people in, and we just kind of put a band-aid on the problem, and we're back to the Abraham Lincoln quote of, avoiding the problem today and deferring it till tomorrow. We're back to that situation. And culturally, a lot of people have got a horizon of 3 months, 1 year, and that's the easy thing to do, but it's actually not the right thing to do for most businesses. What we see smart businesses doing is moving more towards this digital by design approach. So really starting to think about what is the right balance for their customer and them as an organization and their USP or business model, and starting to build that into how they serve their customers. Huge amounts of hype and noise around robots, AI, automation, all across the board. But the truth is, and we saw in the, the data that Jonty put up from the CCH survey around knowledge bases being one of the main areas. Ultimately, the best intelligence in your business gets in the lift and goes home at night. It's in the headers of the people that work for you. And that's where the knowledge base comes. It's a little bit like you going onto Google right now and typing a search for a local Italian restaurant within a mile of your house. And then when you turn up to the restaurant, you find it closed down 3 months ago. Your confidence in Google, the moment you did that, dropped through the floor. And all of the AI, all of the bots, all of the all of this is underpinned by a knowledge management system. And if you haven't got that piece of the story right, the rest of it starts to unravel pretty quickly. So as we start to think about what does this mean for the advisor of the future, and Martin talked a lot about the fact that, the shift from and the line becoming a lot more blurred between front, middle and back office. I think we will start to see the role of the advisor changing. The routine, automated, mundane stuff will end up being pushed more and more through self-service, automation, AI enabled service, which is great for organizations. The technology can handle that. The technology is here and available today, and it can be done at quite a low cost, customer service price. However, what it also means is the stuff that's left, the stuff that can't go down that route, is by definition awkward and ugly. And if you think right now about many organizations over the next 3 months with the coronavirus are going to be hit with a whole wave of customer service complaints and queries because nobody set their business plan out for 2020 expecting coronavirus to impact what they were able to deliver. But the reality as we sit here at the end of February is that's what's happening. And so many organizations are going to have to change the way they deal and respond with that. They're going to have to scale up their customer service operation quickly, create some more capacity, pull some more people into it. And as we move forward, we're going to be thinking about specialist skills. So somebody who complains, you're going to have to deal probably with someone who's got really good negotiation skills. And this person may be an employee of your organization, but they could be somebody who's an outsourced person with a really, really defined skill set who works for you and 3, 4, 5 other companies, just negotiating with contractual disputes with customers. We could have Tony the techie. So Martin talked about, technical skills being brought nearer the front. And one of the other things that Martin mentioned, and a really easy, quick win for many organizations, is how you feed that learning back into the self-service engine. And one of the best ways, the moment your customer support team has fixed a problem, is being able to post that in your user forum or on your website or get it on Google, put it somewhere where other customers, when they type those words into Google, can find that answer really quickly. So having Chris, the crowdsource advisor that's there, triaging, validating, vetting content before it gets put up there to enable that knowledge base to be constantly fed with up-to-date information is going to be kind of one of the key things. And as we start to think about how do smart organizations go about designing and building this digital by design approach, the first place we say to start is think about your customer journeys. What are the top 3 journeys in your organization that drive most revenue or profit into the company? What are the top 3 journeys that cost your company most amount of money? And what are the 3 journeys that expose your business to most regulatory risk or compliance? So if you're a bank, that could be, lending money or mortgages or loans. So understanding, the 80-20 rule, what are the 20% of journeys that drive 80% of the money, the pain, the risk? And once you've got that, that gives you a great place to start. If you try and do everything at once, you'll do nothing. But if you can break it down into 2 or 3 key journeys and start there, you've then got the template and the cookie cutter to start to move forward. As we start to think about that optimal customer journey, it's then really about aligning the existing systems. Quite often when we walk into a company, there is a perception that everything has to get ripped out and they have to buy this new kind of AI-powered spaceship that's going to solve all of their problems. The reality is most organizations, if you think of it as a jigsaw puzzle, most organizations already have something like 80-90% of the pieces of the puzzle. They just haven't glued them together properly, and they haven't dropped in the extra 10-15% that really starts to make it sing well. So quite often a lot of this can be done quite quickly and quite cheaply. So aligning the people, the process, the policy and the systems around that optimal journey starts to make the advisor's job an awful lot easier. Providing the self-service tools frees up the advisors. And we talked a little bit earlier about real-time speech analytics and technologies like that will help upskill an agent or an advisor in real time. So that ability to dip into that knowledge base, listen to a phone call, dip into the knowledge base, pull out a specific crib sheet for the advisor that may be able to help them solve that problem there and then without having to push it to Tony the techie, is another thing that we're going to start to see more and more of. Unified communications. So one of the questions we talked about, how many people are going to work from home in the next, I think it was 3 years or whatever it was, and it was like quite a high number, 60%. unified communications is kind of the glue that holds all of that together. And Microsoft Teams, Skype, many other options out there, but we're seeing right now, if you looked in China or many other countries where people are forced by coronavirus to have to work from home, unified communications is one of the kind of key enablers that's kept the kind of lights on and kept things moving, because people can work from the safety and confine of their own home. And most importantly, creating this culture that allows easy handoffs. So the slide when we talked about, organizations being in that vertical silo, you've got to somehow think more horizontally and create a culture that aligns people to journeys as opposed to vertical silos, and get away from those sort of tasks. If you can do that, then you start to create a real digital by design culture, and you start to create a digital by design experience for your end customer. And when we look, there's very few businesses where what we would say is digital by default, where you're forcing people down a digital only route. There's very few organizations we deal with where that's the right answer. There are some, but for most people, digital by design, where you're using advisors and those higher level skill sets to their advantage, is key. And finally, last bullet point, whether it was experience or whether it's TravelX, almost every month there is a large company that trips over security. And every time you layer in a new system, you need to be sure, like a link in a bike chain, you need to be sure that that link that you just introduced is as strong as all the other links in the chain. So with that said, I'll now hand it back to Jonty.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed for that, Jeremy. I think some great advice there. We need to start to look at outcomes, not as tasks. Digital by design, I think, will become the norm. And I think the best intelligence is in the minds of your advisors, and that walks out of the door every evening. I certainly like your thing about the restaurant that had closed. I booked a campsite in France with a great restaurant in the village, only to get there to find that restaurant had closed. The nearest one was a 3-mile walk away, so that was quite over the top of the hill. That was quite a but it did make the food taste better. So yeah, it's all about having that up-to-date knowledge.
I didn't mean to upset you, John, so I didn't mean to bring back these bad experiences.
So if you'd just like to fill in the survey as you leave the webinar, we're out of time, I'm afraid. Next week, we're going to be looking at how to increase customer satisfaction. The winning tip comes from Mohammed. Mohammed says, sometimes we spend so much time trying not to lose customers by identifying their needs, we lose focus on keeping the right agents to provide them with a good service. I think very keen words of wisdom. So thanks everyone for joining us today. It's certainly been a lot of fun. Martin, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, John. Yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
And thank you, Jeremy, for dialing in from Stockholm.
My pleasure, and thank you all for giving us the time and opportunity today.
Okay, and thank you, everyone, and we're going to be back here next week. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.